All right, well, welcome back to VP Culture. This is lesson 4 in the Culture Science class. This lesson is called the Leadership Superpower. We're going to focus you on the one thing that motivates all people and how to use it as a superpower. So let's dive into this. Okay, so we've discussed that there's one thing that motivates all people, and that one thing is valuing people and being valued by others, really. And so this is our superpower. We can focus people on this one thing and it becomes sort of like your prime directive, like they had in Star Trek. The one thing that we always follow in all of our decision making. And the nice thing about this is we're also learned that this is the one thing that everyone really wants. And if you can keep them focused on it, then they'll be self-motivated to move in that direction. So your job as a leader is not so much to push them in this direction, but to help them to discover that this is where you really want to go all by yourself. And what this does is it becomes a much easier way to lead, where everyone is moving down this path in a self-motivated fashion. And you as a leader are really just refocusing people on that, because we can get distracted and lose our focus as team members, as leaders, as to where we're going and why we're doing what we're doing. And that's the number one reason why we have disengagement, is people forget why we're here in the first place as human beings. Okay, when I initially started my quest for teaching people about culture and how to work together as teams, I found that there were different leaders. Like John Maxwell would say there's 21 principles that you have to follow, or Gallup says there's 21 outcomes that we really need to key in on. And then Covey said there's 7 habits that you really have to have. I even found somebody who said there's 53 different ideas that you have to have great culture. So which is it? And I've asked people who have gone to these schools, so what's the one thing that leaders lead people to? And they stand and look at me with a blank stare like, I don't know. I've got the 21 things or the 7 things or the 12 things, but one thing. Otherwise it ends up being like, okay guys, go this path, that path. And they don't really know where they're going, and no one really, it's just this jumble of leadership. What do we apply now? Where do we go now? It's really easy to get lost, and it's really easy to confuse people as to where you're leading. What's important now? Oh, the 4th principle, the 22nd idea, the 3rd habit, the 26th, principle. It becomes very convoluted and very confusing. So we need one thing that leads people on. So we're also going to be diving into what the difference is between these two types of motivators. Intrinsic motivations, which is really what we're talking about here with VP culture, and extrinsic motivations, which is money, which is the obvious one. But there's also things like, hey, I'm going to do something really purposeful with this project, or I'm going to really enjoy this. And those are all good things, don't get me wrong, but they end up being things that motivate us from without. So those are the things that as leaders that we would need to constantly be pushing people towards and having people move in this direction in an energetic way that will be very difficult. So what we really want to do is focus people on this intrinsic side of the motivation, which is really created by what we create with others rather than what we create externally. We might create an object or a service, for sure, we all do, but we all do it for people and with people. And when we start to focus on that, this becomes an intrinsic motivator. And we've gone over some of the neurological reasons behind that, and we'll continue to lean into that in this lesson as well. Okay, let's talk a little bit more about extrinsic motivators. So listen to this. The more you push, the more resistance you will get with extrinsic motivation, both positive and negative. So what do I mean by that? So if I'm giving you, hey, I'll give you this cash incentive if you do this thing, you're going to need to continue to fuel that fire the next time you want that to happen. You're going to have to give that extrinsic motivator again at a greater amount for it to have the same effect. Or if I have some negative consequence, like if you do this, this is what's going to happen. That kind of negative consequence is going to have the same demotivational factor. So extrinsic motivational tools that leaders use are are always of diminishing quality, and they're always exhausting because they have to have constant energy from a leader, and you end up managing people, and people will always find another way to sort of avoid your negative manipulations, and they'll always try to find a way to get more out of your positive manipulation. So you're exhausted because you're constantly being drained, leading with extrinsic motivators. So we really want to focus on this second category, the intrinsic motivations, and use your superpower of valuing people is going to create intrinsic motivations. You're turning them towards the interior of themselves. That's what intrinsic means. It means inside of us. So let's look at this quote here. Truly great leaders are the ones who inspire greatness in others. So what you're doing is you're helping people to discover what's great in them. You're releasing the awesomeness of each individual. And as a leader, that's what you can do. You can't create something more than that individual already is. That individual definitely can improve. They definitely can grow. And you can see it in them, and you help bring it forth. So valuing others is what we're trying to lead people towards, and it is this universal tool. It becomes your superpower as a leader to focus on one thing and one thing only. And that's this. To be a great leader is to focus the energy on valuing others within your team and within your organization. It's the singular focus. It's the one superpower. It's the thing that will make you a great leader. It's this singular focus. If you can do this for yourself, do this for your team, you're going to handle everything that's going to come at you. All right, so that's the focus of this lesson that we learned from the book. So let me tell you a story about Enron. Enron is a company that didn't use intrinsic motivators, but extrinsic one. Actually, they tried to do both, but people really followed where they were leading, what they were doing. And what they were leading towards was money, and they were using the extrinsic motivator of fear and greed. So this positive motivator of money, which is extrinsic, and the negative motivator of fear, which is extrinsic, but they were also at the same time trying to pretend to have values. On their walls, they had this emblazoned when they went out of business: integrity, communication, respect, and excellence. Those sound like values that would end up in valuing people. And yes, if you did those things, you probably would value people. But that's not what they did. That's not how they acted. It was just sort of a smoke screen for these primary motivational tools that they were using. So people will follow what you do more than your theoretical framework. So what they did was, they initially created a great company. This is the CEO, Jeffrey Silling, and there was another gentleman by the name of Lay, who was the founding partner, and they were consolidating energy companies in Texas, and then they became a trading company, and Jeff Skilling became the master trader of their whole organization. And the key to his success was his clever accounting. He had this way of marking down, he called it mark-to-market accounting, and he would mark down his futures because they were trading in commodities, and they would mark down their future profits and future projection of prices as actually being assets and actual money that they projected that they had already. So this, armed with this funny money accounting technique that was actually backed up by a large accounting firm at the time, they went out to market and they started making millions, and they became darlings of the industry. And they actually used this fear and money techniques to get what they wanted in the governmental world of oversight. And so state after state became dysregulated, and they were in there helping them to get dysregulated, and they were in there bribing and manipulating the markets so that they could corner the markets. And they began to corner the market in California, one of the biggest energy, if not the biggest energy market in the entire United States. And when they had that cornered, they were selling electricities and futures from all over the country that were supposed to make it through the grid to California, but didn't quite make it. And the prices went up, and rolling blackouts went out throughout the state. And that's when questions started being asked, because they up until then had used fear to really keep people quiet about their funny money techniques that they were using to overvalue themselves so that they could leverage more finances to pour into these buyouts and to look even bigger than they actually were and to get more stock value than they actually had. So they used fear to keep people silent. But ultimately that resulted in a toxic culture. When these guys started to come under fire, Kenneth Lay, the chairman, and Jeffrey Skilling and Andrew Fastow, all of these people actually ended up being called into Congress to question what they were doing in their accounting techniques. Arthur Andersen, their major accounting firm, actually almost went out of business because of this. They actually changed their name because of this. I remember coming home from a flight from Europe and seeing an advertisement showing black and white. These are the ethics of Arthur Andersen trying to dig themselves out of this morass that they had created by following these people down the hole of money and fear. So this culture of toxicity ultimately ended in the total demise of the business. They went from billions of dollars of valuation down to zero in 2001, and the whole company came crashing down, and catastrophic outcomes for Jeffrey Skilling. All of this extrinsic pursuit in his own life led him to 24 years in prison and the loss of all of jobs in the entire company and the disillusionment of the entire company. So this is a horrible outcome when the leadership of an organization pursues extrinsic motivations exclusively to the interior motivations of valuing people. If they had made their company all about valuing people, creating value for the people that they served with their commodities, the people on their teams, instead of pitting them against one another, they would send them out as a sales team and fire whoever didn't get the contract, and then greatly reward those who did. So that negative and positive push and pull eventually destroyed people within the company and ultimately led to their own destruction as well. So that's a very negative example of why not to use extrinsic motivations. I'm going to tell you a positive story about Luis Urza, the leader of the 33 Chilean miners that were trapped in a mine thousands of feet below the surface in Chile. This happened back in 2010. And Luis was trained by his family and by his teachers to have a lot of integrity and faith and diligence in what he did. And he valued his miners even before he was stuck down in this mine. So he set up a regimen of, let's work here. Let's use, this is the bathroom, this is the place where we're going to eat, and this is how we're going to do this. He organized the men. He rationed the food. He made sure their spirits stayed high. They finally established, after 17 days of being trapped, a little line of communication where they could send notes back and forth with their potential rescuers, and occasionally a video from one of the family members. They would sing, they would play games. He kept their spirits up. He kept them valuing their own lives and the lives of their co-miners down there. And finally, after many, many days of being down there, they were rescued on October 15th, 2010, and they came up one by one in a metal capsule they called the Phoenix. And Luis was the last one to be raised to the surface. And he didn't want accolades for this. He didn't want any special honors. He just wanted people to know that valuing people is worth it. And those men that were around him said that they would follow Luis no matter what, because he was like family to them. And they survived and they endured because he helped them see what was valuable inside of them. So instead of leading people from extrinsic motivations, Luis used internal motivations to help people keep people strong in the most difficult work situation imaginable. So if you can overcome in a situation like this using intrinsic motivations, imagine what you can unleash with people who are in better circumstances than this. focusing people on what matters and keeping them focused even in the darkness of the dismal days of work, because work is always hard at some point in time. And if you can keep that focus, people will follow you to valuing themselves, to valuing others. That's what's so beautiful about intrinsic motivations. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about the science behind all of this that we've been discussing. So first of all, let's talk about the singularity of focus with VP culture. When I'm focusing someone's mind on the singularity of valuing others, I'm helping their brain to maintain a singular focus. You really cannot function well under a multitasking environment. That's not really a thing that's possible for us as human beings. It's a singular question for action. Your leaders can always say, is this valuing people? If I do this, is that really the greatest way to value people? And so it helps them to wrestle through every single question, every single action that they have to take, that you're not there to micromanage. They can ask this question and it helps their brains focus on what truly is important. Okay, so it's the focus component that's important as well. So they've actually discovered that there is this part of your prefrontal cortex that is responsible for focus. And remember, we've talked about earlier that if you create a toxic culture like Enron did, you're eventually going to take this part of the focused brain offline. And this is what focuses you on ethics and morality and keeps you focused on the one thing that motivates all people. So without that part of your brain, you're constantly going to be struggling. So the other thing that we've talked a lot about is the serotonin leadership molecular transmitter, which is within the brain. And this is the thing that we need to kind of pair between the dopaminergic pursuit of things. We actually need to direct that dopamine towards the correct focus towards others. So what you're doing is you're using your brain's innate features to focus with dopamine on the pursuit of something. Have it pursue the right things, connecting others, making affiliations and connections and valuing others. And then serotonin becomes that protective agent that keeps people going back to this again and again, whereas these extrinsic motivators alone that are only tied to dopamine become problematic. They become destructive. They become that deconstructive behavior that becomes a spiral downwards. Whereas when I use dopamine and I use serotonin together in an upward cycle, we drive people to working together and collaborating and having more of that valuing people kind of culture. So it's an upregulation that our brains can be focused on by you as a leader. So you as a leader, according to Dr. Henry Cloud, your job is to focus the mind of your team on one singular thing. And that's the beauty of VP culture, is we give you that one thing that will ultimately motivate all people. All right, let's transition to our questions now. So, which leader has inspired you the most to value others? Did they use tricks or did they embody this sense of valuing? So, talk about that question. Next question. As a leader, what does it feel like to be constantly motivating and pushing people to action? What does it feel like to be constantly trying to extrinsically motivate people, either with negative or positive extrinsic motivators? What does it feel for you as a leader? What does it feel for you as a team member to be led that way? Talk about that. And then finally, let's look at this last question. How would it change you as a follower if a leader clearly stated where he was leading you? So let's look at these three questions. All right, so thank you for following us on this fourth lesson in the culture science class, the leadership superpower, the power of focusing individuals on one central place that you're going towards in your leadership. People will know where you're going, and you as a leader will constantly be able to refocus people on that one thing. Where am I going? To valuing people and being valued by others. It's that simple. So Thanks so much for following us in this lesson. We look forward to joining you again in the next lesson.